comes a new challenger!
Hello friends, Alexander the Greatest here with our very first ever deck profile, Viktor, Herald of the Arcane. We're going to be going over strategies, deck lists, sideboard, and even matchup charts a little bit. But before I get into that, one thing I do want to bring up is during the course of this video, I have a tendency to refer to battlefields as points at several times during the video. So you might hear me saying things like push the points, hold the points, get in the points. A lot of times there I'm actually referring to battlefield specifically, and I will use points to describe points. I know it's a little confusing, but with the context it does become a little bit easier. In future videos this won't be an issue, but for this one I had used it without really realizing until after the entire video had been recorded, so just bear with me on that. So without further ado, let's get right into it. The objective of this deck is fairly simple. In the early game, you're looking to play as many units as possible, and in the late game, use your powerful spells and large units to help push points. So a typical starting structure is going to be, if you're going first and you don't have the Obelisk of Power, you're typically just going to be making a token. If you're going first with the Obelisk, you are going to be making a token and playing a 2 energy unit, and then going second, same thing, you're going to have 3, so you're going to make a token and make a 2 energy unit if you have one, and then on the next turn you're ideally going to play 2 units, maybe even 3 if you went second, playing 2 energy units and then a token as well. And then turn 3 is where you can make the decision whether you're going to pivot to starting to use your removal and bigger units to try to push points more effectively, or if you're going to just keep spamming the board. And then the following turn, you'll typically almost always transition into spending bombs or big spells, but we'll get into that more later. First up, we're going to cover the battlefields. So first up, we have the Candlelit Sanctum. This is typically going to be our game 1 battlefield. This is going to be our neutral. We're typically looking to play this because we want to save the Obelisk of Power for when we know for a fact we're on the play, and since the die roll is not decided until after you choose your battlefield, you're better off choosing the Candlelit Sanctum. This is just a general good one. In this deck, once you start getting to like the mid game, you're going to want to start trying to find your bigger spells and units, and this Candlelit Sanctum does a great job of just kind of moving cards out of the way, scrying your way through your deck and helping you get to those bigger units. You also have a few little draw synergies in the deck, so on some turns you're actually going to capture the point and then use one of your draw effects to immediately find the thing that you might have scryed to. It's just a very good neutral battlefield and one of the better ones for this deck. Next up, we have Obelisk of Power. This is the absolute best one. In my experience, the highest win rate thing that I've experienced in this game, besides maybe a turn 3 Aurora on the play, is going to be Obelisk of Power in this deck going first. And we're going to absolutely want to save this one for when we are going first. The reason for this is it's going to enable you to always be able to play a 2 energy unit and a token, so on your second turn you can always capture 2 points. You'll also be at 5 energy on your turn 2, so you're able to play another 2 energy units and a token if you have it, for a total of 5 units. So you're able to just keep churning out guys and keep pushing these points extremely effectively. This is like this is the game you should win. Like, it shouldn't matter what the matchup is. Typically, if you're going first with Obelisk of Power, you should be extremely favored. Finally, we have Treferian Warcamp. Treferian Warcamp is kind of another like almost neutral battlefield, but the reason it's so good is because, like I said, we are spamming so many units on the board, and it is able to allow us to overpower decks that typically only put maybe 1 unit in the point, like Master Yi or Sett. So we are able to kind of trade up our tokens a little bit, get a little extra fighting power. Master Yi is going to be the biggest one, of course, but this is kind of just, this one's all right. It's definitely good when you're trying to spam the board and kind of overwhelm your opponent. I would say it's probably the weakest of the 3 battlefields in this deck, but it's still probably one of the better includes from our choices of battlefields. I really wanted to include Targon's Peak here because this deck does have a lot of action and reaction speed spells. One of the reasons I did not include Targon's Peak over the Treferian Warcamp is because Kaisa actually abuses it a lot better than you, and it's very difficult to beat Kaisa, even sometimes when you're on the play, when they have the Targon's Peak to keep untapping 2 energy every single turn. It lets them hold up their spells defensively. All your units are very weak, so they're very susceptible to removal. Targon's Peak would be probably my choice over Treferian here. if I thought I was going into a later Kaisa field, but I always felt it was very rough when they had Targon's Peak, and then having it myself, potentially giving them 2 games of Targon's Peak was not something I was looking to going into, so I did not include it here. However, if you thought you were going to go into a field that might abuse the Targon's Peak less, specifically Kaisa, like a lower Kaisa field, which we're not seeing a lot of right now, Kaisa is one of the most played decks, I would in fact play Targon's Peak over Trifarian Warcamp. Next up, we'll just get right into the deck itself. So starting, we have the Viktor champion unit, Viktor leader. This one, I think this is a strictly superior to the other one. The other one just doesn't even have, it's 1 less might. Its effect is so much more conditional. A lot of times this one's going to be your turn 2 or 3 play. You're going to play this and just like as a body if you kind of stumble or you don't have anything else in hand to play. And it's great too because half of your units that you play on turn 2 are actually going to trigger some sort of effect when they die, so you want them to die, and then Viktor's going to replace them. Like I said, the objective of this deck is to just keep sending guys into the points and then using your bombs or your heavy removal package to help clear guys out of the points so your little guys can keep pushing. This deck does not defend battlefields very well. It has some means to do so, but it is more of a offensive deck than it is a defensive deck. So being able to continually generate recruit tokens from your real units is going to allow you to keep having units to push into the points because you are going to lose them a lot of the time. They are going to win combat against you when they're on offense. So it is really important to keep tempo in this deck and keep your unit count up because you do get to a point in the game where you are just playing bombs every turn and they're very power intensive, and sometimes it is hard to develop units outside of these bombs or removal spells on that turn. Next, Ravenbloom Student. This is just another great 2. It gets bigger. You do have a lot of cheap spells in this. Our 2s in this deck are trying to be one of 2 things, either as big as they possibly can be or some sort of like death knell type thing that is going to give us some sort of advantage. This is the former. This is just like a unit that can be bigger. It's one of the biggest 2s you can have in these domains. It's just a very good card overall, and it does help push points even in the late game. Next up, we have Soaring Scout. So Soaring Scout kind of falls into the category of 2s that we want to have die. In my opinion, this is one of the best 2s in the game. And how you're going to want to position your 2s is the smaller 2s, the ones with the death knells. You're going to want these ones when you're going first. And the reason for this is because there's not going to be anything contesting the points. So you're going to be the first one getting in the point. And then when they want to come back on your guys, you're going to trigger the death knells. Whereas when you go second, you're going to want the bigger guys because they're going to be getting into the point first and you're going to need to be able to win a fight against their 2s. So Soaring Scout is going to be one of the better ones going second because you're going to get in the point and then they're going to give you an extra rune if they want to kill this. And that's very essential for this deck because this deck is very, very power hungry. Almost all of our late game bombs and spells are going to cost 2 power or more. So this is just one of the best 2s in the deck in my opinion. Just very, very solid unit. Next up, we have Watchful Sentry. A Watchful Sentry, kind of the same thing as Soaring Scout, but instead of a rune, you're going to get a card. This is another one of the cards that synergizes with that Candlelit Sanctum. It is able to, you can win the Candlelit Sanctum and then send this into a point that's contested. Maybe you're able to kill this with one of your own spells to draw cards. Just another one of those units that gets in the point, and then when it dies, it replaces itself with a card, which is very good for a deck like this, where you are just kind of throwing things into the point and losing them continually. And then finally, we have the Daring Poro. This is one of the big 2s. These are the ones you're going to want going second. When your opponent gets in the point first, it's just a 2 might that's able to get to 3 when it attacks, which is going to beat out most of the 2s that exist currently. So you are going to be able to take those points. Next up, we have Cruel Patron. Cruel Patron is just a very, very hardy mid-range unit. And the cost to play him is kind of negligible in this deck because you're spamming out so many tokens. A lot of times what you'll end up doing with him is you'll actually end up sacrificing a guy that's in the point already that's going to get run over by one of your opponent's units next turn. Sometimes it's even a Soaring Scout or a Watchful Sentry, so you get that effect off immediately, but you're effectively sacrificing something that you know is going to die anyways, so it's almost a negligible cost at some points of the game. And he's just massive. He's going to be very important versus decks that are better at holding points like E and Sett that just have big units, and he can kind of like force his way into these points where you might not otherwise be able to get over their big units. So he's very essential in those. I think Sett is probably the single most important, but he's pretty close too. Next up, we have Sprite Mother. I think this is a staple for this deck. Just a very, very good unit. The ability to kind of have access to a guy that can attack immediately is huge, especially in a deck that's trying to be aggressive. This is a great finisher. It's very good also versus the ramp Aurora decks, because one thing that is super important versus them, especially if they don't have that Aspirant's Climb, is that you need to be able to get 2 points on your turn 2. So if you go first, if you don't have the obelisk or they don't have the obelisk and you can't play 2 guys turn 1, this guy actually does let you get those 2 points right away on turn 2. So you're at 4, you play this, you already have a unit on board, like your token or whatever, you get both of them into the point. This token will die, but most of these decks don't have a way to kill the other unit that's already in the point, so that'll stay in the point, and then you'll end up moving the Sprite Mother herself to the point the next turn so you can keep getting points. But it has a bunch of other applications too. The Sprite itself is a 3/3, so it's very good against the aggro decks where you're kind of in a race. A 3 is typically good enough to push over most of these 2 energy units. It also stays in there for a turn, so it can even block the point against smaller units and make it inconvenient for your opponent to try to take that point back. Overall, just a very, very solid card. Next up, we have Riptide Rex, or as I like to call him, Angry Sea Shark Cannon. This guy is one of the bombs that we talked about before. He's just another one of those point breakers that we were talking about. He lets you get into these points. He deals 6 to any unit at a battlefield, so that's going to break through any of these decks that are holding up bigger units in the points, whether it's Yi, whether it's Sett. Even Kaisa might have like a Darius or their own Kaisa in there that you need a way to break through because your units don't fight super well, and this guy kind of just enables you to do that. He's just overall a very, very solid unit. He is a little power hungry, like many of the late game cards in this deck, so that's something to be aware of. He leaves behind a 6 body too, so he can keep fighting for you afterwards as well. Just overall, this is a very, very solid card. And finally, the last of the units, the Thousand-Tailed Watcher. This, in my opinion, is the #1 card in the game. We talked about this in our top 10 cards in Riftbound list. This card is just absolute all-star. Again, this is another one of your bombs that you're using to force points. This card just breaks pretty much any point against any deck, whether it's Sett, whether it's the Aurora decks when they have multiple bombs in there, whether it's Master Yi. This guy is just a house. He's probably your best finisher. He's pretty close to being your best finisher. Some matchups it might vary. A Grand Stratagem sometimes is a little better in specific matchups, but I think for the most part, this is one of the best cards in your deck. Moving on to the spells. Next up, we have Stupefy. Stupefy is just one of the better shrink combat trick cantrips in the game. This is just cantrip to help us win fights. A lot of times, 2 energy units are going to have 2 might, and they're going to try to run into our tokens. And like I said, this deck doesn't defend super well, but one thing you can do with this is actually have those tokens be trading with those 2 energy units, and it draws you a card. So it's a very big value swing. It's just kind of letting you kind of trade more efficiently. Sometimes, too, you only have small units on the board, so you need to be able to trade up into bigger units to get into points when you don't have your removal, and this helps you do it. I think one of the biggest things is it just replaces itself, so it does synergize with that Candlelit Sanctum, like we mentioned earlier. Overall, this is just a very good card, one of the better combat tricks in the game. Next up, we have Hidden Blade. Hidden Blade is one of the single best spot removal cards in the game, and this deck abuses it so well because it can actually use both sides of the coin. And what I mean by that is not only can it be used to actually kill your opponent's units, but you have so many token fodders that it is very easy to sacrifice your own and actually just +1 off of this, which most decks can't actually do. They actually have to sacrifice a real unit. Granted, a lot of them do it when they're going to lose the unit anyways, but here now you can kind of do it whenever you want. Again, this is another one of the cards that synergizes very well with your Sanctum. Just very, very solid card. It's especially powerful against the ramp Aurora decks because they're so slow to get online, and even when they do get online, they're typically only playing 1 unit a turn. Even when they get the Aurora, they're still very slow. Even when they can get 2 units a turn, you can use this to help you push points and seal out the game before they're actually able to stabilize. It also allows you to just keep hand advantage up if you need to, kind of help you. It's one of the few cards that enables you to actually hold points, which your deck is not very good at, like we mentioned before. It's just a very, very solid spell and one of the best spot removals in the game. Next up, Smoke Screen. Just another solid combat trick. It's kind of like a super Stupefy, if you will. Just It's a great way to be on defense if you need to, but it's also a great way to break points on offense. It's a very good card. I only played 2 of this because it does cost a power, and I don't like playing this spell early and having to pay a power because it doesn't always kill the bigger things, especially if they're not in the point already. It is only a combat trick, so it can't get guys that aren't already in the point, and it also requires you to have something to actually win the combat against them. So that is one thing to consider when playing this card. But overall, it is still a very solid combat trick. Next, we have Cull the Weak, another one of the best spot removals in the game. This is much like the Hidden Blade, a card that's extremely effective against the ramp Aurora decks because they're so slow to churn units out. But it's also very good when you go first. A lot of these decks might play a heavier unit on their turn 2. The Setts might play Kiana. The Kaisas might play their Kaisa. A lot of these decks are able to actually play their champions from their zones on turn 2, so this is very good going first, because if they do put that first guy in the point, you're able to trade it, then you're able to Cull the Weak, and like always, you're just sacking some nonsense, whether it's a Soaring Scout or a Watchful Sentry or just a token. You don't really care. It's usually going to be something in the point that was going to die anyways, so you're able to win combat against a guy and then kill their turn 2 play, whatever that might be. You even sometimes just kill their turn 1 play with it. That's a little less common, but going first, it's actually still kind of alright, because you do, especially if you have the Obelisk of Power, you develop 2, you get 2 points, and then you actually sack one of those guys out of the battlefield, kill their turn 1 play, you play another guy because you're at 5 now, and you can generate a token if you want. So just a lot of tempo behind this card. It's just a very, very solid removal spell. Finally, we have the single best removal spell in this deck, Singularity. I always joke that my win rate is directly correlated to how many singularities I draw and play in a game, and for some matchups that's true. Where this card is really going to shine is against decks like Kaisa and against decks like Master Yi, where you're just like trying to remove as many units as you can. Against Master Yi, a lot of the units they have in the point are smaller, and it does require a lot of buff spells to actually be able to get out of range of this. So that's one place this is really good. It does kill the Yi champion unit itself cleanly if they don't have any buffs. It's just a very, very solid card. Kaisa is just kind of like churning out units endlessly. Let's say they have 2 units in the battlefield and then 2 units in their base, and you can win combat against the 2 units at the battlefield. You kill the 2 units in base, and then you run over the 2 units in the battlefield and just like kind of keep the pressure on them, kind of keep removing these units. Ideally, you're looking to play this when you have 7, because you want to keep developing when you play big, heavy things like this. So same thing with Riptide Rex. You want to play these cards at 7 energy so you can still make that token, because you are throwing away a lot of units in this deck. Your units are disposable and you're losing them very fast, so being able to develop as many as possible in the early game is very, very important, and being able to weave them into your bomb turns is also very important. But yes, this card is just a house. Being able to hit the units in base is part of what makes this so strong, and this is your best battlefield breaker. This is the best way to push into those points. The last spell we have is Grand Stratagem. Grand Stratagem is one of your win conditions, and it is arguably on par in importance with the Thousand-Tailed Watcher. Now, a few things I will note here is the Grand Stratagem is only a 2 of, because it does require a board, and against some decks you're not really going to have a board, especially if you're just like taking a very aggressive approach where you're just throwing caution to the wind and sticking every unit you can in a battlefield and just losing them to trades because you know you're going to win through sheer tempo. Sometimes you just don't have the board to do this. Sometimes your early game you don't draw enough 2-cost units to actually like spam the board enough, or some turns you're not able to weave the token in, so you don't have a big enough board to abuse this. But even with a board with only say like 3, maybe 4 units, this is good enough. You're going to get 15, 20 extra power out of that. Sometimes where this card is also very good is you're able to push into points on your turn and actually hold this up on defense too, because it just makes your units so big. It's just a very, very good win condition, and it turns all your otherwise lackluster tokens and 2-cost units into actual units to win the game with. So it's just a very, very good card. It also has my favorite flavor text in the game, so bonus points for that. Finally, we have the Sideboard. We've got 2 retreats. Retreat is a card that could very well have been in the main. I opted to put it in the side because I think where it's going to excel a little bit more is into some of the slower matchups, especially the ones where recurring Fox is incredibly important. This is going to be the Aurora ramp deck sometimes, because Fox, when they do stabilize, is going to let you actually break through those large sized battlefields, and being able to retreat it, especially if they run it over the following turn, is going to let you keep doing that to keep breaking through those points. It's also good against Kaisa, where they might be trying to remove your units. Some of these Kaisa decks now are playing the Dreaming Tree too, so against them you can actually abuse that and draw cards with this as well, and keep retreating some of your bigger, faster units, like the Fox, that is going to let you keep pushing against them and win that race potentially, or even the Sprite Mother, which is going to give you another fast unit for cheaper and keep your rune total up as well. Next up we have Shen. Shen just allows for some of the biggest blowout lines against aggro decks that the game allows for right now. And one of the places where your deck is actually kind of weak is against these aggressive decks. And the reason for that is your guys don't defend well, like I said, so you're both kind of playing this aggro game, except their units have a little bit of girth to them, whereas yours don't really have any. And a lot of these aggro decks do play spells like Jinx and Annie. They are playing some amount of like defensive spells, so they are able to kind of defend against your units. They are able to get in points early and kind of keep you from getting into the battlefields and from scoring those points. So one of the places where you can really blow them out is with Shen, because what happens now is you go first, you make your 2 guys, let's say, or you go second, you make your 2 guys or whatever. They get their guys in the point. You're able to run one of them over with one of your bigger things like the Daring Poro, say, and you leave 3 up, and now they're in a very awkward position, because the first Shen you might get off free, but the second one is always broadcasted. They should know it's there. They should understand why you just opted to leave energy up on your turn 2 or your turn 3, say. But that's one of the nice things about Viktor is, because you have that token generating ability, you actually are able to very easily leave that energy up to be able to cast this guy, and it makes getting into points an absolute nightmare for your opponent. It's even great when they use a removal spell to kill a guy that is currently in a point before they begin the showdown, and you can actually just play this guy in response and get him in there, and now you have a huge guy in that point still blocking for you. So he's just very good against aggro decks, and that's where I think he shines the most. Sometimes he's even good against Yi, especially if you're on the play, because Yi does have a hard time forcing guys into points. They are very good at defending points, but they're not so great at actually getting into the points. So Shen can also cause some blowout lines for them as well. Overall, I think this is a solid card. I even had this in the main at some points. I had to make room for other things, but like, this is a card I could very easily see in the main depending on what the meta is. It's not as great versus Kaisa because they have so much instant speed interaction. Even there, sometimes it has some good lines. Finally, we have Leona Determined. This is mainly just for Master Yi. You can bring it in against the Aurora ramp decks, but I think those are decks that you're mostly favored against anyways. This is most important versus Yi because, like we talked about, they're kind of trying to defend points. You're trying to push into those points, but sometimes you don't always have the offensive power to do that, especially in the mid game. Leona just comes in and stuns whatever unit they have, and now that you can just push as many units as you need to into that point without having to worry about them dying. Leona also defends for 5, which is huge. It's very hard for Yi to force their way in to a 5 might unit. They don't have a lot of big units, especially in the early to mid game, so they're going to have to use a lot of spells, which you can then use yours to try to defend. She's just a very, very solid unit. Even against aggro decks, she can be okay sometimes because she does let you get into those points pretty much risk-free, and then she's blocking for 5, which is a lot more than what most of your units have currently. Just a very, very solid card, but it is mostly for Master Yi. Finally, let's talk about a few of the matchups briefly. And we're going to review mostly meta matchups. We will talk a little about some things you're less likely to see, but it's just going to be a kind of a brief overview of your strategy. The strategy typically remains the same versus most decks. As for the specific matchups and mulligans, we'll talk about that a little bit too. So first off, we're going to talk about the Kaisa matchup. This is more or less an all-out arms race. You really need to make sure you see a 2 here, especially if you're going second. You need to be able to double unit here. I think the best card in this matchup is going to be Singularity, to keep 2-for-1ing their units and keeping those units off the board and being able to keep pushing pressure against them. Singularity is going to clear pretty much every single unit in their deck, and they don't really have any buffs, so you don't have to worry about them like tricking their way out of it. It's just going to 2-for-1 every single time. It's going to get guys in the base. That is the single most important card versus them, and I would probably keep any number of them I see in my opener. If I had 3 and I didn't have a 2, I would consider mulling the third one, but outside of that, I'm probably trying to keep as many of those as I possibly can. It's just a very, very important card in this matchup. Outside of that, you're just looking for a curve, good units. Sprite Mother's very good because her 3 might token typically beats out a lot of the early units and even some of the mid-game units in Kaisa. This is a matchup I would say is a little rough, especially because of the Falling Star, being able to 2-for-1 essentially any unit in your deck, so that is something you need to be aware of. I think, again, your strongest game is just going to be when you have the Obelisk of Power going first. That is when you're really going to be able to kind of put the pedal to the metal and just like go full gas. The Viktor unit is also somewhat important here, so if you can weave that into one of your turns, you definitely want to do that. Next, we'll talk about the Aurora ramp decks, and these are kind of all very similar, so I'm not going to specify which ones. They all pretty much have the same general strategy. These are your best matchups by far, and the reason for this is because you're able to, even going second, always produce 2 units, and going first when you have the Obelisk, you're able to produce 2 units. They also typically play the Obelisk themselves, so if you're first and they have to use the Obelisk that game, you get to play 2 units. You're always just able to push for 2 points super consistently with this deck against them and get 2 every turn, and because they spend most of their early turns doing nothing but ramping or playing draw cards, there's nothing really contesting your guys. They kind of just take the points very, very easily. Another big thing that really helps you keep going is both the Hidden Blade and the Cold the Weak. So when they do get that Aurora, you're going to have one of these in hand ideally and just be able to kill that first thing. With the Hidden Blade, you can't kill things at the battlefield, but a lot of times that first thing is going to be a Dread Bloom, so you are able to kill that and potentially save one of your units. But even if you don't, you have Cold the Weak, which can kill a guy anywhere. It also gets around Deflect, so you don't have to worry about that. These are actually what you're going to be mulling for in your opener. You're obviously looking for a 2 so you can put those 2 units out, but I think the most important things in this matchup are going to be Hidden Blade and Cold the Weak, and you're going to want to look for those in your open mull. A lot of these other things, actually, like Riptide Rex is not all that great because a lot of these guys don't have 6. Sometimes you can pair him, though, with one of your units to kill something bigger. Thousand-Tailed Watcher is actually a very good finisher in this matchup. Same with Grand Stratagem. Either of these are actually really good because they don't really kill things. Sometimes Grand Stratagem's even better because you have so many units on the board, and Grand Stratagem just lets you break through whatever kind of defense they've got up, but typically, your most important things are going to be the Hidden Blade and the Cold the Weak, to kind of trying to find those. And game 1, you have the Sanctum 2, so you can scry for those. Just a very, very good matchup for us because of all the removal and all the early game aggro and bodies that we can put out and how slow their deck is. One thing I will say about the Aurora decks as well, most of them are the same. Some of them do have niche upsides against you. If you're playing against the Yi Aurora deck, they're going to have Deny, so you do need to be careful when you're casting your Cold the Weak or your Hidden Blade that you don't rely on that to not get blown out, and then they deny you, and then you're in a bad spot, so something to consider. And then the MF versions do have the Mind Splitter, so they can rip those from your hand. One way to get around that is you can set the Hidden Blade to a battlefield you're already controlling. Next we have Sett. This sometimes can be tricky. Again, this is another one you really want Singularity against. Cruel Patron is also going to be a very big one here because they have a lot of mid-rangey units with buffs. You're going to need to be able to get a unit that can actually win fights against them, and Cruel Patron kind of does that. He gets over the Sett 5 cost with a buff, which is really, really important. Hidden Blade and Cold the Weak can be important here. Cold the Weak has a very specific window where it's good because sometimes they're actually forced to tap out to play like a Kiana, or sometimes they put like a Sett in the point and that's all they have. You kill the Sett, they move it back to base and save it, and then you Cold the Weak. This has some very opportune moments, especially when you go first, but a lot of times this card doesn't do a whole lot in the matchup. And then as always, you're just kind of looking for a curve. Singularity. Riptide's another really, really solid one, at least game 1. The problem with Riptide and Singularity, they are very important cards in this matchup, but what happens is in game 2, almost always, if they're not maining them, and some of them are maining, most are just siding, they're going to side in Unyielding Spirit. And this card is going to absolutely hose your damage base removal. Now, I don't think you ever take Singularity out when you're playing against this card. You just have to time it well, hope they tap out. Sometimes you are going to just have to play the Singularity and just hope they don't have it. Riptide Rex is actually one you can consider siding out if you need to. So against Sett, you could put in Leona for this potentially, just so you're not playing all these very heavy power cards that are going to blow you out if they do have the Unyielding Spirit. Now, I know what you're thinking. Singularity, this is a lot more all in, and it is, but the upside is much higher, and that's kind of how I like to play. So like, at least with Riptide against Unyielding, you get a 6 body, but Singularity is usually more of a blowout, so I like Singularity more. I'm kind of more of a all-in type of guy when it comes to these sort of things. So that is something to keep in mind when playing against them game 2. They're also going to get in their sabotages potentially to be able to rip some of these interactive spells out of your hand. For the Master Yi matchup, it's very similar to Sett in that you are going to want to try to use bigger mid-range units to push the points. Singularity, Riptide Rex are going to be some of your best friends to get those units out of the points. Again though, Unyielding Spirit is going to be a nightmare for you in the post-board world. You're just going to have to kind of grin and bear it with that one. Leona is going to do a lot to shore up that matchup because you are going to be able to actually stun those units. And when they're only leaving one in there, there's no risk. You can just throw everything in the point, and there's very little risk to you losing anything because they can't even, it still doesn't deal damage when they buff it, so there's not a whole lot they can do there. I think that's one of the biggest things post-board for you. Grand Stratagem, again, is another one, and this is one of the matchups where the Treferian War Camp is really going to shine because you are kind of able to use multiple units to bully their Yi guys who aren't getting those buffs, or kind of like to kind of get over the difference between you and them. You're just going to use your combat trick spells too to try to win fights against them. I think one of the most important things is when you get in those points, try to leave some amount of resources up to be able to cast Hidden Blades or Smoke Screens, because one thing the Yi deck doesn't do very well is actually push the points themselves. Like, they don't get into battlefields super well, and I think that's one thing they really struggle with, is getting into the battlefields. Next, we'll briefly talk about the aggro matchups. Jinx, Annie, there's not a lot of these running around right now. One thing I will say about these decks is that they are kind of a little bit favored game 1 against you, so you have to be careful, especially when they're going first. Your deck doesn't really stop aggression very well. Like, you are sort of an aggro deck, but the problem is you don't really win fights super well. So against other aggro decks that have slightly bigger creatures than yours, you will often have hard times actually pushing into the points against them. Annie's a little better at defending points, where Jinx is a little bit better at pushing them. You don't care as much about them pushing your points because you're just like, your guys are all weenies. Like, they're going to get in there either way. So Annie is the more annoying one in my opinion. Again, Singularity, guys, it's just the best card. Like, in these matchups, I wish I could give some more profound advice than Singularity. But like I said earlier in this video, there's a lot of matchups where my win rate is directly correlated to how many times did I draw and cast Singularity. Sprite Mother is going to be very good here because it does give you a fast creature that can push points, especially against some of their smaller units. It can get a value trade, and it also holds that point down. It is a 3, and sometimes the Annie decks have harder times pushing over 3s depending on what they have going on, or they have to use a spell. But once you get to the board, you are going to bring in that Shen, which is going to help you immensely, even blow them out in the early game sometimes. So I don't feel too bad about those, especially since there's not as many of those decks going around right now. And that's going to conclude our Viktor deck profile. Tell us what you think in the comments. Does our deck suck? Is it the greatest deck you've ever seen? Just let us know what you're thinking. Make sure to like and subscribe as well, and we will be back with more content soon. And I will catch you guys next time.